is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Good morning, 9 o'clock, your call. Bad week for the government, terrible night for Labour this morning. Do you salute George Galloway? The most sensational result in British by-election history, bar none. His own words as he celebrated his win in Bradford West by-election with a majority of more than 10,000 votes.
This is an uprising amongst thousands of people who have demonstrated in this mammoth majority a total rejection of the three major parties on the British political scene.
It's the first time an independent candidate has won a parliamentary by-election in Britain since 1973. Huge embarrassment for Labour after a fraught week of negative headlines for the government. The main political parties are in a state of shock this morning. The man who once went to Iraq and said to Saddam Hussein, although he says he was referring to the whole Iraqi people, he said, "I salute your indefatigability." This morning, do you salute George Galloway? Is there disillusionment about the main parties amongst all the voters?
I'm not surprised. He had a single issue, which was Iraq. It was the war. This is a one-off, and I don't think that it will be repeated anywhere else.
If you think of all the things that people are concerned about, George Galloway does not have the solutions to the problems in people's lives.
0500 909 693. Terrible result for the main parties in the Bradford West by-election last night. Is this a case of people cocking a snook at the establishment? Kevin Maguire, earlier on, the Daily Mirror writer, he said if you add together the Labour, Conservative, Liberal, Democrat, Green and UKIP votes, they still wouldn't have beaten George Galloway and his Respect Party. George Galloway himself said it's a very comprehensive defeat for New Labour. Still calling them New Labour. It's a pathetic performance by the government parties. The big three political parties have had a very salutary, unkind lesson this evening. It's difficult to read that without slipping into his voice, a bit salutary, unkind lesson this evening. I hope they all take note. The people of Bradford have spoken this evening for people in inner cities everywhere in the United Kingdom. Have the people of Bradford spoken for you? Earlier, Samin Campbell had this to say.
Well, I don't think anyone's denied that there has been a disconnect between the public and mainstream politics for some considerable time. And it's not a good result for us, but of course, as you know from your own experience, these by-elections pretty well always turn into a two-horse race. What I don't think anyone expected would be that the outsider would romp home.
Well, let's speak to Andrew in Halifax. Good morning, Andrew in Halifax.
Morning, Nicky.
And Toby in Bolton. Toby, good morning. You think what, Toby?
I just think it's a brilliant night for British politics. I think party politics has been the ruin of our country. And with George Galloway being a truly eloquent voice for the left, I think it's about time he was back in mainstream politics.
So what's wrong with party politics?
Well, I just think it ends up with the sort of the same old little public school boys deciding which course the country is going to go, and it's not necessarily what the public at large think. I think George Galloway does reflect a lot of the opinions of the public at large. The left has sort of been pushed out of British politics, and everything is sort of very right-leaning now. But I mean, he's a fantastic politician, and he can speak extremely well, and many people follow him as was seen out by the radio shows he was doing when he was out of politics. He's absolutely loved by a lot of people.
What do you think, Andrew?
I think it's an absolute tragedy, Nicky. I live in the neighbouring constituency and I know Bradford West very well. First of all, I think we should dispense with this nonsense that this vote was won by all sections of the community. This was a vote that was won by pandering to extremist Islamic prejudice and extremist Islamist sentiment.
Well, how did he do that?
Well, first of all, let me tell you, I drove around that constituency for a considerable period of time on Monday, and I noticed that all the areas with significant Muslim populations were festooned in Respect posters. Other areas of the constituency where the Islamic vote is negligible, there were no posters of any kind supporting any party.
Is it extremist Islamic sentiment to say that the war in Afghanistan is foolish?
No, because many people hold that view. I think it's pandering to extremist Islamist sentiment when his party colleague, Selma Yaqub, when interviewed on Radio 4 this morning, couldn't bring herself to condemn Afghan killings of British soldiers. Instead, she used the old sort of provost speak that Sinn Féin apologists used to use when, talking about IRA murders. So I think that's pandering to extremist Islamist sentiment. I think some of the views he has on Israel, which, let's face it, is a plucky little country, the only democracy in the region, surrounded by psychopaths that seek its annihilation. And I think his views on Israel and Zionism are absolutely disgusting.
Toby and Bolton, do you want to come back?
Well, I don't think there's... The main psychopaths in that particular area are Israel. They're the ones with the nuclear weapons. No one else has got the nuclear weapons. They are the bully boy of the area. And this is one thing that George Galloway, swimming against the tide, has stood up and said for years. And it is absolutely true. And many, many people, not just in this country, around the world, agree with him.
My goodness me, we're talking about... Isn't it interesting? Talking about the Bradford West by-election for 3 minutes, and we're into the Middle East. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Indeed. Could I just ask the gentleman from Bolton, Nicky?
That's the idea.
Could I just ask him, if you lived in a country that was surrounded by people that sought your annihilation, wouldn't you have nuclear weapons?
Well, I think if you looked at the plain facts, and I spend quite a lot of my time looking through the YouTube clips, much of which has been George Galloway, Battle in the Sky News, who come out with this constant drivel about how it's all the Palestinians' fault and all this sort of stuff. He's done wonders trying to get the actual message through that it's not poor old Israel getting picked on. Poor old Israel are a massive nuclear force in that area.
All right, guys. Relevant as that is, but let's just move to Chris Mason just for a minute, because he can speak to us now. Chris, you were at the camp. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Today Bradford, tomorrow the Alaska Mosque. Chris Mason, it just shows you the traction that this man has on so many issues for so many people, for and against. An extraordinary political figure, George Galloway.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, the last 6 or 7 minutes discussion on your programme has illustrated that, the trajectory that the conversation has gone in. I'm in Centenary Square in the centre of Bradford, Nick. You've got an interesting guy to chat to now. I just bumped into, walking through the street, Charlie Stewart. Charlie is a Labour Party member in Bradford West. And Charlie, who did you vote for yesterday?
I voted for George Galloway.
Why?
I think we need a change. I think there's a lot of despondency in Bradford. There's a big hole in the city centre where shops should have been built, and there's a lot of unemployment. And although Labour have Marsha Singh done a great job in the past, I think we need a change, and I think George will be good for the city.
There's been a lot of talk here in the constituency, and indeed on 5 Live in just the last few minutes, about the connection some people draw between George Galloway and his rhetoric and what's going on in the Middle East and Afghanistan and elsewhere. How important was that here, do you think?
Possibly a good point by George. I don't think it was entirely the reason why people voted George in. I think it was one of the reasons, but not the main thing. From a personal point of view, as an ex-serviceman, I think we do need the troops out of Iraq. There's a lot of out of Afghanistan. There's a lot of people getting maimed and killed, and I think they need to come back.
But for you, just finally, it's that sense of what the political classes stand for, what the established parties stand for, and a sense from you and others here that they just didn't represent what people wanted.
Yeah, I think a lot of the mainstream parties are letting the constituents down. I saw on the news this morning Harriet Harman said Labour needs to learn the lessons. Well, from a personal point of view, until she gets some of her ministers, namely Kevin Jones, ex-defence minister, to tell the truth about people, constituents, especially myself. He told lies about me in a German debate.
He's not here to answer for himself.
I know he isn't. But until there's more accountability to the public, people like George can only do good.
We've got lots of issues going on, Chris. Personal issues, the Middle East already. This is the George Galloway factor. Sunny Handal is editor of the left-wing blog Liberal Conspiracy. Good morning, Sunny.
Morning.
And we got Alan in Bradford. Alan, did you vote for him?
Morning, Nick. No, I didn't vote for him. I'm not actually a constituent, but I run a business in Bradford.
All right. What do you think? What do you make of it?
I think it's not so much a poke in the eye for the three main parties. I think it's much more about having a strong personality and a good voice for Bradford. We've heard in the news this week about forgotten families. Well, Bradford's a forgotten city. It really needs investment, it needs help, and it needs a strong voice to champion its causes, particularly from a business point of view, which is what I'm interested in.
Sonny Handal, is George Galloway the conscience of the old left?
No, absolutely not, and I would hope that people don't think of it in that way. I mean, he's, that would basically assume that the old left is supportive of dictators, doesn't care for gay rights, doesn't care for women's rights, and all those issues, which clearly Galloway isn't. That Galloway does support dictators, like, for example, the Assad from Syria, as well as the Iranian regime. So, no, I would hope that he isn't. And also, just to answer the point that the gentleman just made, he was a crap constituency MP for Tower Hamlets. He hardly represented Tower Hamlets in what he did not bring about any change, and that's why actually he got chucked out the next time round. So, if you're hoping that George Galloway is going to be going to put Bradford on the map, you'll be sorely disappointed in actually going from now on.
But hang on, so you've said, Sonny, that let's bring in Amjad in Bradford. Amjad, are you there?
I am indeed.
Did you hear what Sonny Handal, the editor of the left-wing blog Liberal Conspiracy, has said? This is a man who is an apologist for dictators, and there are problems with women's rights and gay rights here with respect. How do you respond to that?
I disagree profoundly. I've lived in Bradford since 1960. It was a lively, vibrant city when I came here. I've seen its demise. I have businesses in Bradford. They need a breath of fresh air. George Galloway is a well-travelled man. He's travelled not only in the Middle East, he's travelled throughout the world, and I think he'll bring a difference to Bradford. A difference that's really vital, that's needed. We have let me talk, please. We have in Bradford one of the lowest standards of education in the whole country. We have the highest rate of unemployment. We have a growing population. We need somebody that thinks out of the box. The traditional parties have failed the city. I believe in getting rid of the unemployment, and I think George Galloway will provide all that.
But this is silly. I mean, he didn't do anything for Tower Hamlets. What did he do for Tower Hamlets?
Listen, what did you do for Tower Hamlets?
No, I'm asking you. What did
the other politicians do for Tower Hamlets?
I didn't stand as an MP Tower Hamlets. I'm asking you, if you're going by George Galloway's
Bradford, West Yorkshire. I'm bothered about Bradford. I want it. I don't want to see a black hole in the centre of Bradford. I want a Westfield there. I want more parking facilities provided in Bradford. I've got businesses in Bradford, and I want people to come into Bradford, to shop in Bradford. I want our school standards to be...
Again, you're not getting my point. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I agree that Bradford needs a lot of regeneration, it needs a lot of work, and actually
that's what I want to focus on. I don't want to be sidetracked by a Middle East dispute.
Okay, let's readdress the question in a minute. Quick word. Let's get Nigel. Stay there, Sonny, and stay there, please. Amjad there in Bradford. Let's speak to Nigel Farage, leader of the UK Independence Party. Good morning, Mr. Farage.
Good morning.
Why did this happen?
Two reasons. Firstly, we're seeing, through George Galloway, the birth of something quite unknown in English politics, and that is religious voting. And the big vote base that George Galloway had was all from Islamic voters. And then, in the last week, when it looked like he had an opportunity of possibly beating Labour, then people from all sorts of parties, including my own, switched to vote for him because they wanted to give a real kicking to Labour. So it's a bit of both, I think.
A religious voting, Sonny Handal. What do you make of that?
Well, look, I don't want to go down the sectarian lines. There's no doubt that Galloway appealed to Muslims in ways that I find appalling, because I think it is sectarian. But at the end of the day, I don't disagree with the point that mainstream politics has failed Bradford, and don't disagree with Nigel Farage's point he just made either. But the question is he, George Galloway, sort of a guy on the left, and should the people on the left support him? Absolutely not. That's what I would basically say, because, I mean, a few years ago said something like, he said that homosexuals are not executed in Iran, only rapists are, which is completely just untrue. So, if you are going to... And he said that he supported the election of Ahmadinejad. Now, this is not a guy on the left. He's a dictator. He's a near dictator. He does does not support democracy.
Amjad, there is people make this. How can you support a man who supports right-wing dictators like Amjad? How can you support a man who supports right-wing dictators like Assad if he does that? Sonny Handel says he does.
This is claptrap about religious voting. Let me tell you, yes, I am a Muslim. Yes, I do come from Pakistan. Therefore, I have a unique understanding of that region. I do think that's a futile path that our politicians have led us into. Unfortunately, our good men are dying there. And
Sonny Handel says he supports Assad.
We should not be in Afghanistan.
Sonny Handel says he supports Assad. How can you, if that is true, how do you support a man who supports a right-wing dictator?
Look, there's a lot of politics going on in Syria. There are a lot of agendas being followed. We have our own agenda. We are not prepared to do anything against Bahrain, where we have interests, right? But we are prepared to do things in Libya. This is hypocrisy. This guy is talking about Bradford. He's going to represent Bradford West. He's not an MP for the world. He's an MP for Bradford. That's what I want to concentrate on.
Nigel Farage, he has a very internationalist agenda, though, doesn't he?
Oh, very much so, and of course he was talking about Iraq and Afghanistan, and there's no question about that. But it is, as I say, we've never had before, really, we see it in Northern Ireland, of course, where we've had sectarian politics, and the world's become a sadder place for it. But I see this victory of George Galloway's as a victory for sectarianism and a victory for division in an already divided society.
No, I don't see it like that.
Sonny Handel.
I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with that point. I do think that every time people see Muslims voting for a person, they say it's sectarianism. Look, I think that the point is that there is a large anti-war vote in Bradford for good reason. I was quite strongly against the war in Iraq, and I do think there is a lot of hypocrisy in British foreign policy when it comes to the Middle East. But that doesn't mean I support someone like George Galloway. So the point is not that people supported him because they're Muslim, and that in itself does not mean it's sectarianism. But the point is that they supported it because they felt that the mainstream parties had failed Bradford. And this really, I'm a Labour member, but the point is that the Labour Party should not take its votes for granted in places like Bradford. And sadly, I think that a lot of people will say that they did. So it is a wake-up call for the mainstream parties, not just a point that this is...
Sonny Handel, where's your evidence that, do you have it at hand, his support for Assad?
Yes, he said it loads of time on YouTube, and he said it loads of time on his radio. So, he's made apologies for the dictator of Syria. He actively said in an interview with Ahmadinejad that I support your election. Now, Ahmadinejad, by any stretch of the imagination, is not a man of the left. He's not, he's a right-wing conservative.
Yeah, Amjad, very quickly, Amjad, go on.
Yeah, what I want to say is that this is democracy at work. If there is a large Muslim population in Bradford, then the voting will reflect that. If you were to have election in Golders Green or Prestwich in Manchester, you'll have a large Jewish population that will support Zionism in Israel. So this is democracy at work. You can't call it sectarianism.
No, I'm not calling it sectarianism. That's what I said. I don't think that this should be called sectarianism. People are voting because they feel frustrated.
Nigel Farage just did.
Well, he does. I don't think Sonny Handel necessarily agrees with Nigel Farage. Listen, let's leave it there at that point. 9:23. Thank you all very much. More to come. We're going to speak to Labour MP in just a minute. Here's Michelle.
Your call.
Good morning. It's 9:26. Some news just in. Finnish police say a gunman has been arrested after firing several shots at a school in southern Finland. No one was injured. The attacker shot through the door of a secondary school in Orivesi, 120 miles north of Helsinki, and the man in his 20s did not resist arrest. The school was evacuated after the incident. That's just in. No one injured. Right, to Mr. Galloway, to Bradford. We've had Bradford, we've had Bahrain this morning. Let's go to Weston-super-Mare and speak to Phil. Good morning, Phil.
Good morning, Nicky.
And Lynn, who's in Leeds. Good morning, Lynn.
Morning.
What's gone on here, Lynn? What do you think?
Well, Nicky, 2 years ago I went, attended a Radio 5 Live programme in Headingley with Victoria Derbyshire, and I actually went on air. I've always voted Labour. I used to be a member of the Labour Party, but I just felt that I just could not support them any longer. So I pledged my support for the Conservatives, and now I just ruled the day. I was hoping that they'd changed, but obviously they haven't.
You have a dog to attend to. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right.
So the thing that I'm ringing about is the trouble is, I think the politicians are just taking us all for granted.
Okay.
And I've said that I will never vote for either Labour or Conservatives. If I vote next time, it'll be for UKIP or the raving loony party, because I don't think they could do any worse.
Phil in Weston-super-Mare, what do you think?
Well, Nick, I think we shouldn't be sidetracked by the fact that it was Galloway in Bradford, because if there were by-elections all over the country tomorrow, you'd have similar results for strong independent people, because everybody's disillusioned with the three main parties. You've got the weakest opposition that's ever been, and yet people are favouring Labour over Conservatives.
Jerry Sutcliffe, the weak Labour MP. Good morning.
Morning, Nicky.
The weakest opposition that's ever been, says Phil.
Well, I don't accept that, but I mean, clearly this was a bad result and a shocking result for those of us who are in Bradford. I mean, we didn't see this coming. We worked very hard in the campaign, and obviously the people of Bradford West wanted George Galloway.
Why?
Well, I think there's local issues involved in Bradford West in terms of George talked about the Afghanistan war, talked about...
Like Afghanistan's a local issue, is it?
Well, it's not, is it? But I mean, clearly people in Bradford West felt that way. But we will be working hard again to make sure we get it back in 2015. By-elections throw up these results sometimes, and we have to learn the lessons.
Tell us about George Galloway. You worked with him?
Well, we'll have to, won't we? In the sense of
you have in the past, haven't you? Used to be a member of your party.
I mean, I knew George when he was a Labour MP, and I knew he when he was an MP in the various constituencies he stood for. And I think that therein lies the problem, that he has moved around a lot, and we'll have to wait and see now whether he honours the commitments he's made to Bradford people.
What's he like?
He's a good politician in the sense of he's a very good orator, but it's the substance that we will watch now for in the coming weeks and months.
What do you think about his positions on Syria, for example, and previously on Iraq?
Well, just completely disagree with him, of course, and that is an issue, and that what we need to look at now is what happened on the doorstep, and we need to find out why people voted for him.
What aspect of what he says about Iraq do you disagree with?
Well, he didn't support the war. My view was that it was right to do at the time on the information that we had.
And what do you think about his position on President Assad and President Ahmadinejad?
Well, I've not heard his views on that, so I mean I can't comment on that.
Yeah, It's not a good day today, is it, for Ed Miliband?
Well, I don't think it's an issue for Ed Miliband. I think all three parties have had a good kicking. The Liberals lost.
But if Ed Miliband he's leading an opposition party, and it's been a PR disaster week, a week from hell for the Conservative Party. Ed Miliband is the leader of the opposition. Why isn't Ed Miliband inspiring people?
Well, the opinion polls show that we're 10 points ahead, don't they? So if you look at people expressing their view across the country, we're ahead on the opinion polls. But the reality is, when it came to the vote in Bradford West, local difficulties around the community politics in Bradford have caused the problem that we've had.
Hi, Nicky. Can I just now gather my thoughts? The reason that I did ring, the Conservatives actually did get in our constituency, and the previous Labour person, he retired, and he was a fantastic MP. He'd come to the local garden parties. He was always there in the local papers. He was approachable. If you had any problems, you could go to him. But a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking, who is the MP that we voted for? And do you know, we've never had any correspondence. You never see anything about him in the papers. So we got in, but for our town, he's done well, I can't see anything that he's done, and I think this is why I'm so angry.
It's interesting, isn't it? He's certainly a vibrant campaigner, George Galloway, Jerry Sutcliffe, isn't he?
He is, and I think that's what's happened, and it almost turned into like a Celebrity Big Brother X Factor contest where he was putting himself forward as, a international politician. And clearly people have gone for that. Now, I think that the trouble will be to terms of what will happen in the coming weeks and months, will it be a good constituency for Bradford West?
But he's a man who says that Tony Blair should be in the dock in The Hague as a war criminal. Does that not say a lot about a divided society, that he has, a lot of people are following George Galloway, a man with that message?
Well, that wasn't the message he was putting across. He was talking about, Bradford West. He was talking about the issues in the Bradford city centre, all of the things that were local to Bradford. So what we need to know now, is he going to work with the rest of us to try and solve some of these problems?
Thank you very much indeed. It's
Nicky,
nice.
there are a lot of non-Muslim people who feel that way about Tony Blair.
Not all?
No.
Well, it's a lot.
Well, there we are. Maybe his reach extended beyond the aforementioned Muslim community in Bradford West. Thank you very much for now. Thanks, Alan in Bradford, Amjad in Bradford, Lynn in Leeds, Phil in Weston-super-Mare. Be great to hear from you as well. 0500 909 693. Do you salute George Galloway? Good morning. Do you salute his victory? Do you salute George Galloway this morning? He won the Bradford West by-election in spectacular style. We'll speak to Victor in Leeds. Hello.
Hello, Nicky.
And Grace in Hastings. Good morning.
Hello.
Grace, what do you think?
Well, the ordinary people don't seem to have a say nowadays. The politicians only talk over us. I mean, I'm 78 and I still remember Iraq. I was against that. I feel sorry for the Palestinians. I think something should be done there. But these things are totally ignored. They're like an elitist government, regardless of which party they're in. And the common person hasn't got a say anymore.
So you are very disillusioned with the political establishment, if you like. Yeah.
I am indeed. I've heard this week, if you're an old age pensioner and you pay tax, you're well off, and stupid things, but they're not actually talking to us.
Victor, what do you think?
They're only talking to themselves.
Victor, what do you think?
Hey, Nicky, do you ever get that feeling of deja vu? Some years ago, George Galloway overturned a massive Labour majority held by Una King, and it was in the Tower Hamlets borough, and Dispatches did a programme called Britain's Islamic Republic. There was an expose on how he'd teamed up with Islamists and jihadis, and they called out the Islamic vote in a heavily Muslim area. Mm-hmm. And we've just seen that happen again, and none of you have sort of spotted this. It's deja vu all over again.
So, John Renshaw, Chief Political Commentator for The Independent on Sunday. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Nicky.
What do you make of this?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that I didn't see it coming, and I think the whole Westminster elite ought to be hanging its head in shame, really, because while we were making fun of the Cameron government for being out of touch and making silly jokes about pasties, the George Galloway was organising the voters of Bradford West, and we weren't even paying attention.
A vibrant campaign, a very well organised one. He's a charismatic figure. He's a great speaker. But what scratch the surface? What do you get with George Galloway, do you believe?
Well, I mean, you get nothing at all in the end. I mean, in the end, he doesn't make a difference. But he is a measure of how out of touch politics and journalism are, in a sense. I mean, you had that caller Grace just then saying, she doesn't feel represented, doesn't feel she's got any influence, and in a sense, you can see how that happens, because all three parties do, because we have centrist politics in this country, they do sort of tend to occupy the same ground, and there are a lot of people at the fringes who feel disenfranchised.
Yes, and Mr. Galloway himself, he's playing to that, is he? He has played to that.
Well, he's brilliant at it. Yeah, I mean, you've got to realise that. The guy is, he's not my kind of politics at all. I used to be a constituent of his in Bethnal Green and Bow. But he is brilliant at mobilising the sort of grievance politics of the Muslim community in this country, and of the working class, the excluded working class.
Tim Montgomery, editor of Conservative Home website. Tim Montgomery, this was a terrible week for the Conservative Party, and it's ended up focusing on the woes of the Labour Party. An extraordinary sting at the end of a week.
I know, and like John Rentoul, I didn't see this coming. I don't think many of us did. But yes, the week ends with question marks about Ed Miliband's leadership. It isn't a one-off for Labour. They lost badly in Scotland against the SNP. They may well lose London. London is supposedly a Labour city, but it's very possible that Boris Johnson could beat Ken Livingstone. So there are big questions about whether Ed Miliband is an effective leader of the Labour Party. But I accept what John Rentoul says as well. It's not just a party political phenomenon. I think George Galloway is something of a one-off, but equally we have to listen to the fact that many people in Bradford felt disillusioned with all of the
interesting point has just occurred to me as well. John, you're still with us?
Yes, I am.
I'm just thinking that we had Nigel Farage on saying this is an example of sectarian politics appealing to one particular vote. There are those who question that deduction. But I'm just wondering, the mention there of the forthcoming London mayoral election, there are a lot of questions being asked as to whether Ken Livingstone is playing a type of sectarian politics himself at the moment.
Absolutely. I think there are some people commenting already this morning saying that if this George Galloway victory means that Ed Miliband needs Ken Livingstone to win London even more. I think that's getting things completely the wrong way round, because Ken Livingstone is trying to win London by practicing exactly the same sort of politics that George Galloway is practicing. He's trying to mobilise the ethnic minority vote, and in particular the Muslim community. But obviously he's trying to practice a sort of broader version of that. And I think it's A, it's going to be unsuccessful, but B, it's absolutely the wrong response.
Stephen in Leeds, good morning.
Good morning, Nicky.
Let me just bring in Mick in Ipswich as well. Let's do Mick first. Hi, Mick.
Actually, hello?
Wherever you are, what do you want to say?
I think you have to salute the fact that he has defeated the major parties, but the point I made to your researcher is I think what we've got in this country, we haven't got major parties, we've got one party with three different wings. They all believe the same thing. They're all interested in business. Nothing should be put in the way of business, even if those businesses like the utilities, the railways, etc. are ripping off the public to a disgraceful degree. And we're just tired of a lot of them. And when somebody comes along that offers something different, even though he's not going to achieve anything as a single person in Parliament, we go for them. I just think it's because politicians are just so out of touch. None of them have probably ever had a bill come through their front door that they can't pay. So therefore, how do they know what it's like to be a normal working man on about 15,000 quid a year when everything's going up, his petrol, his insurance, everything else, and then you have all the multimillionaires in the cabinet saying that we're all in this together.
There we are. And moving to Stephen in Leeds.
Good morning, Nicky. To salute him, why are we talking about saluting George Galloway? What has he achieved? I just find it unbelievable. We're in the worst economic depression for years and years and years and years. What is George Galloway going to do for the people of Bradford? Is George Galloway going to live in Bradford? He says he's going to live in Bradford. To me, George Galloway is just a champagne socialist who's obviously, he has certain views which appeals, and it's been well documented in your programme today, which appeals to a large section of Bradford West. Why are you going on saluting him? What has he achieved? What has George Galloway achieved? Please tell me.
Well, he's pulled off an extraordinary result.
No, it's not an extraordinary result. I've just said we're in the worst economic depression ever for years and years.
It was a Labour seat. It was the seat of Her Majesty's official opposition.
Yeah, but the Labour seat, the problem you have here is it is a Labour seat, but the Labour politicians in Bradford West have been putting it very, very mildly. People are very, very gullible in life. Galloway is an unbelievable orator. He's taken on the American Senate, he's taken on people here, and defeated them. He is a great orator, and people will believe what they want to believe, and if you'll convince them enough, they'll believe what you say.
John Rentoul, is there a problem with Ed Miliband?
Well, I thought there was a problem with Ed Miliband before Bradford West, and I don't actually think that Bradford West makes Ed Miliband's position any more difficult. I mean, I think I think this is something that happens in politics from time to time. I mean, it is a sign of something important. But although it's important, it's not actually at the centre of politics, because there's no future in Galloway's style of politics, and there's no support for that actually across the broad centre of the British electorate.
Oh, what's going on in the background now?
I can hear something.
I think we're hearing
chuntering from a sedentary position.
We're hearing the domestic, I think, going on in the background.
Nicky,
yeah.
I think Ed Miliband is a disaster. An absolute... I was a member of the Labour Party until last year, and just listening to him, watching him, it just...
Tim Montgomery.
I'm a member of Unite. My union gives the Labour Party £3.5 million a year.
Yeah.
For what? He can't even come out and say that maybe, just maybe, the tanker drivers have got a point. From what I gather, what people are trying to do is they're trying to change their working conditions, they're trying to pay them less money, and this is... ultimately, they work for companies that last year apparently made £138 billion of profit. And he can't even come out and say, because he worries about what the Daily Mail says, well, you know, let's have a socialist party. And even if we lose the next 10 elections, so what?
Tim Montgomery, who organised the spin operation for the Conservative Party this week? Mr. Bean?
Well, it's certainly not been the Conservative Party's finest hour the last week. But, you know, we're in the middle of a parliament and we have time to put things right. And that's the opportunity David Cameron must take. He must fix what is a very wonky Tory machine.
A wonky Tory... Thank you all very much. It's 9:50.
Your call,
Abdul in Bradford. Hello, Abdul in Bradford.
Hello. Yeah, I'm coming for hello, Nicky.
Hang on. Wait.
Okay.
Hold your horses. Let me bring in... we've also got Jeff in Oxford. Hello, Jeff.
Hi.
And Jeff is a first-time caller, so Jeff, on you go, first of all.
Yes, I listen to George Galloway quite a lot on Question Time, and I'm a full supporter of everything, a lot of what he says. It's a breath of fresh air to hear somebody from the left for a change speaking on behalf of working class people. The Labour Party no longer represents the working class people. The unions set up the Labour Party to represent us, and they do not do that. They manage the country with the Tories for the top 1%. And they've moved so far to the right now that there's no longer any point in voting for the Labour Party. I'm one of 7 children. We all used to vote Labour in the 70s. Not one of us vote Labour anymore. So there's no one for us to vote for. And if we did vote for any of the top 3 parties, you're voting for the status quo.
Abdul.
Hello, yeah. I'm coming from a slightly different perspective, Nicky. I'm a 38-year-old Muslim in Bradford, and I'm worried about the Muslim community because, as you know, lots of hatred against the Muslim community. The attacks have been on the rise, the highest they've ever been. He makes out as if he's a friend of Muslim people. He stands up for their rights around the world. Have we heard a word from him about what's going on in Syria? 9,000 of our brothers are being killed. Not a word, because he doesn't know what to say, because it's Arab against Arab. He'll only stand up for the Muslims when it's against, if it's Israel or it's West or America or Tony Blair, it's only for his own personal gain. He's only in it for himself.
Was his voice...
He doesn't care about the Arab people at all.
Was his voice lacking?
What
did he say about the sectarian violence in Iraq?
I don't know what he said. What did he say about it?
I don't know. I'm asking you because that was, of course, you know, Muslim on Muslim bloodshed.
He'll only come out and make a big ruckus if it's against Tony Blair or against George Bush, whatever it was, just for his own gain. He wants to get his name in the papers and everything. He's not going to do anything for our people in Bradford. It's going to just stoke up more hatred against the Muslims.
Why did people vote for him?
He's such a good orator, such a good speaker. He's fooled everyone.
Did friends of yours vote for him?
Some did, yes, admittedly some did.
Mm-hmm.
But I tried to speak them out of it.
Did you?
They didn't want to hear.
Yeah. David,
he's a good man. He spoke up for the issues within Bradford itself, admittedly. Let's see if he delivers on that.
Well, let's see if he does. David in Hampshire. Good morning, David. Hi.
Good morning. I think that George Galloway is sabre-rattling
and he's very successful at doing it, and that's why he's got to vote, along with the fact, I think that so many people now, including myself and my wife, were fed up of being run by kids. And I mean by that Cameron and Miliband. They're like two boys running a sixth form debating society. And how Cameron this week got caught out with the Cornish pasty fiasco proves my point. Because an experienced politician would never have said that he had a Cornish pasty on Leeds Station the way he did, because he would know he'd be found out. And the way they're behaving are childish, and we want them out.
Thank you very much, Umar in Bradford. Hello, Umar, are you there? Umar in Bradford, are you there? Someone's there.
I am here.
Oh, I know you're there. Let's go to John in Glasgow. Hello, John, are you there?
Hello, Nicky, how are you doing?
Fire away.
First-time caller. First, 2 points. Your last caller, Abdul from Bradford, I believe. Why should Britain be worried about what's happening in Syria, right? Secondly, the previous caller before him, what makes him think that George Galloway represents the working class? I worked in Glasgow on a cold, wet Saturday morning when Nelson Mandela came to visit, and George Galloway turned up in very expensive tailored clothes, lovely shoes, and looked in his nose at us. He's a small, balding, racist, bigoted bully.
Well, that's a really strong accusation to accuse him of all those things. He's not here. Whatever you think about George Galloway, he's not here to defend himself. You're clearly not a fan, though. Simon in Bradford, what do you think?
Well, I wouldn't quite go as far as your last caller, but my view of George Galloway is fairly similar. He's a self-interested charlatan who will do nothing for the people of Bradford West in the same way he did nothing for the people of Bethnal Green and Bow. It's a disaster for all the main political parties last night, certainly, but what concerns me more is the problems it will create within the constituency itself. There's going to be an awful lot of work to do after this result.
In what way?
Well, it's a community that's quite mixed. It suffers from some of the issues that Bradford has suffered from in terms of that relationship. And I think we had an opportunity to continue to build and mend some of the bridges, and I don't think this is going to help us do that.
Do you believe that this is partly about people just saying, look, we're fed up of the main parties?
I'm not so sure it is, Nicky. Obviously, a lot of analysis needs to be done on the result. I mean, I drove through as I was coming into work this morning. You know, if there's clearly a big divide between those who were supporting Labour and those who were supporting Respect, if you look at the placards that are up, I just hope it doesn't lead to even more division within the community afterwards.
Let's look at some texts. Thank God a socialist has been elected to Parliament out of little acorns, says Graham. Another one, George Galloway only stands in Muslim areas because he knows he gets their vote. That's from Kathy in Ealing. This is why many have turned to a maverick like Galloway. I referred to the complete distortion of the facts by Montgomery from Conservative Home. He sees this just as a point-scoring exercise for the Tories, who were beaten out of sight in Bradford West. Let's go to Paul in Leeds. Paul.
Hi.
You've got about 40 seconds.
Okay. I just think it's a fantastic victory for George Galloway. I'm not particularly affiliated to any party, but I just think the man is such a great orator and so inspirational that it'll be a real change to hear the man, even though he's controversial and you may not agree with him. It's a fantastic victory for politics today because I'll just love hearing George Galloway speak.
Oh, right. From that point of view, he adds a bit of colour back to Westminster. You mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, what about what he says? Never mind how he says it.
Well, when you get into the details of, you can argue any point you want. You say he supports dictators, some will argue that. But at the same time, you could go into how the West supported the Mujahideen, which led to the Taliban, all that kind of stuff, how Western governments propped these dictators up at one point. So it's just hypocrisy, really. So when you get into the nitty-gritty of it, you can argue any point you like. But as I say, the main thing is the man is inspirational, and we need more of that in politics so that people connect more.
Thank you for your call this morning. Thank you for all the calls and all the points that have been made. Have a really good weekend. See you Monday.
The Islamist sentiment. I think some of the views he has on Israel, which, let's face it, is a plucky little country, the only democracy in the region, surrounded by psychopaths that seek its annihilation. And I think his views on Israel and Zionism are absolutely disgusting.
Toby and Bolton, do you want to come back?
Well, I don't think there's the main psychopaths in that particular area are Israel. They're the ones with the nuclear weapons. No one else has got the nuclear weapons. They are the bully boy of the area, and this is one thing that George Galloway, swimming against the tide, has stood up and said for years. And it is absolutely true, and many people, not just in this country, around the world, agree with him.
My goodness me, we're talking about, isn't it interesting, talking about the Bradford West by-election for 3 minutes, and we're into the Middle East. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Indeed. Could I just ask the gentleman from Bolton, Nicky?
That's the idea.
Could I just ask him, if you lived in a country that was surrounded by people that sought your annihilation, wouldn't you have nuclear weapons?
Well, I think if you looked at the plain facts, and I spend quite a lot of my time looking through the YouTube clips, much of which has been George Galloway, Battle in the Sky News, who come out with this constant drivel about how it's all the Palestinians' fault and all this sort of stuff. He's done wonders trying to get the actual message through that it's not poor old Israel getting picked on. Poor old Israel are a massive nuclear force in that area.
All right, guys. Relevant as that is, but let's just move to Chris Mason just for a minute, because he can speak to us now. Chris, you were at the camp. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Today, Bradford. Tomorrow, the Alaska Mosque. Chris Mason. It just shows you the traction that this man has on so many issues for so many people, for and against. An extraordinary political figure, George Galloway.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, the last 6 or 7 minutes discussion on your programme has illustrated that, the trajectory that the conversation has gone in. I'm in Centenary Square in the centre of Bradford, Nick. You've got an interesting guy to chat to now. I just bumped into, walking through the street, Charlie Stewart. Charlie is a Labour Party member in Bradford West. And Charlie, who did you vote for yesterday?
I voted for George Galloway.
Why?
I think we need a change. I think there's a lot of despondency in Bradford. There's a big hole in the city centre where shops should have been built, and there's a lot of unemployment. And although Labour have Marshy Singh done a great job in the past, I think we need a change, and I think George will be good for the city.
There's been a lot of talk here in the constituency, and indeed on 5 Live in just the last few minutes, about the connection between, or the connection some people draw between George Galloway and his rhetoric and what's going on in the Middle East and Afghanistan and elsewhere. How important was that here, do you think?
Possibly a good point by George. I don't think it was entirely the reason why people voted George in. I think it was one of the reasons, but not the main thing. From a personal point of view, as an ex-serviceman, I think we do need the troops out of Iraq. There's a lot of out of Afghanistan. There's a lot of people getting maimed and killed, and I think they need to come back.
But for you, just finally, it's that sense of what the political classes stand.
Daily Mirror writer, he said if you add together the Labour, Conservative, Liberal, Democrat, Green and UKIP votes, they still wouldn't have beaten George Galloway and his Respect Party. George Galloway himself said it's a very comprehensive defeat for New Labour. Still calling them New Labour. It's a pathetic performance by the government parties. The big 3 political parties have had a very salutary, unkind lesson this evening. It's difficult to read that without slipping into his voice, a bit salutary, unkind lesson this evening. I hope they all take note. The people of Bradford have spoken this evening for people in inner cities everywhere in the United Kingdom. Have the people of Bradford spoken for you? Earlier, Samin Campbell had this to say.
Well, I don't think anyone's denied that there has been a disconnect between the public and mainstream politics for some considerable time. And it's not a good result for us, but of course, as you know from your own experience, these by-elections pretty well always turn into a 2-horse race. What I don't think anyone expected would be that the outsider would romp home.
Well, let's speak to Andrew in Halifax. Good morning, Andrew in Halifax.
Morning, Nicky.
And Toby in Bolton. Toby, good morning. You think what, Toby?
I just think it's a brilliant night for British politics. I think party politics has been the ruin of our country. And with George Galloway being a truly eloquent voice for the left, I think it's about time he was back in mainstream politics.
So what's wrong with party politics?
Well, I just think it ends up with the sort of the same old little public school boys deciding which course the country's going to go, and it's not necessarily what the public at large think. I think George Galloway does reflect a lot of the opinions of the public at large. The left has sort of been pushed out of British politics, and everything is sort of very right-leaning now. But I mean, he's a fantastic politician, and he can speak extremely well, and many people follow him, as was seen out by the radio shows he was doing when he was out of politics, is absolutely loved by a lot of people.
What do you think, Andrew?
I think it's an absolute tragedy, Nicky. I live in the neighbouring constituency and I know Bradford West very well. First of all, I think we should dispense with this nonsense that this vote was won by all sections of the community. This was a vote that was won by pandering to extremist Islamic prejudice and extremist Islamist sentiment.
Well, how did he do that?
Well, because, first of all, let me tell you, I drove around that constituency for a considerable period of time on Monday, and I noticed that all the areas with significant Muslim populations were festooned in respect posters. Other areas of the constituency where the Islamic vote is negligible, there were no posters of any kind supporting any party.
Is it extremist Islamic sentiment to say that the war in Afghanistan is foolish?
No, because many people hold that view. I think it's pandering to extremist Islamist sentiment when his party colleague, Selma Yaqub, when interviewed on Radio 4 this morning, couldn't bring herself to condemn Afghan killings of British soldiers. Instead, she used the old sort of provost speak that Sinn Féin apologists used to use when, talking about IRA murders. So I think that's pandering to extremists.
Is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Good morning, 9 o'clock, your call. Bad week for the government, terrible night for Labour this morning. Do you salute George Galloway? The most sensational result in British by-election history, bar none. His own words as he celebrated his win in Bradford West by-election with a majority of more than 10,000 votes.
This is an uprising amongst thousands of people who have demonstrated in this mammoth majority a total rejection of the three major parties on the British political scene.
It's the first time an independent candidate has won a parliamentary by-election in Britain since 1973. Huge embarrassment for Labour after a fraught week of negative headlines for the government. The main political parties are in a state of shock this morning. The man who once went to Iraq and said to Saddam Hussein, although he says he was referring to the whole Iraqi people, he said, "I salute your indefatigability." This morning, do you salute George Galloway? Is there disillusionment about the main parties amongst all the voters?
I'm not surprised. He had a single issue, which was Iraq. It was the war. This is a one-off, and I don't think that it will be repeated anywhere else.
If you think of all the things that people are concerned about, George Galloway does not have the solutions to the problems in people's lives.
0500 909 693. Terrible result for the main parties in the Bradford West by-election last night. Is this a case of people cocking a snook at the establishment? Kevin Maguire earlier on, the